"No one wants a fat girl, sir, but I can nurse the baby," said the cook. The widower replied, "Then stay." The wind carried fine red dust that clung to everything, coating the small wooden shacks, the metal walls of storage units, and the faces of the few colonists who worked tirelessly to make this harsh world livable. In the heart of the settlement, Commander Elias Morn stood near the central water tank, his arms crossed over his chest, scanning the horizon with tired eyes. The colony was barely surviving. Supplies were low, morale lower. Every day was a test of human resilience against the unforgiving alien environment. He sighed. Another shipment of supplies was delayed, leaving them with just enough to last another week if the settlers rationed strictly. He looked at the small group of colonists trudging back from the fields, carrying baskets half full of strange alien vegetables that barely resembled anything they had grown on Earth. Their faces were grim, and he knew that without hope, the colony would not last much longer. Then he noticed her. A shuttle had landed near the edge of the settlement earlier that morning, kicking up dust that painted the sky red. From it emerged a young woman carrying a modest bundle. She was shorter than most, round-faced, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. Many might have glanced past her, dismissing her as just another struggling settler, but something about the way she moved, careful, purposeful, yet unassuming, caught Elia's attention. Her name was Marla, though she introduced herself simply when she reached him. I can help," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I can cook, and I can nurse the baby." She gestured toward the small bundle she held tightly against her chest. Elias looked at her carefully. The colony's previous cook had left months ago, citing the harsh conditions. No one had filled the role since. And the baby, little Jonas, the son of a widowed colonist, had become the responsibility of the settlement's leaders, who were already stretched too thin. "No one wants a fat girl, sir," she added quickly, as if she had rehearsed the line and feared his reaction. "But if you let me stay, I can help, really help." Elias studied her. There was a quiet courage in her eyes, a determination that did not demand respect but earned it quietly. He thought about the colony, the struggling settlers, the child who needed care. For a moment he hesitated. "Then stay," he said finally, his voice firm but not unkind. "We could use someone like you." Marla's face brightened with relief. She set her bundle down and began to unpack her few belongings. The other settlers watched with curiosity, whispering among themselves. Many were skeptical. First impressions mattered, especially on a frontier planet. But Elias ignored the murmurs. He had learned long ago that human worth was measured in deeds, not appearances. Within hours, Marla had made herself useful. She cooked a simple meal from the alien vegetables, a stew that smelled unfamiliar but tasted surprisingly good. She managed the baby, feeding and soothing him with an ease that brought comfort to Elias and the other settlers alike. Her presence was calming, grounding, and quietly inspiring. By the end of the day, the settlement felt a little brighter. A small but significant change had begun. The following days were not easy. Urindor IV was a harsh world. Dust storms arrived without warning, battering the flimsy shelters and forcing everyone to take refuge indoors. Water was scarce, and every day brought new challenges, from repairing broken equipment to rationing food. Yet Marla persisted. She learned the ways of the colony quickly, adapting earth-born cooking methods to alien ingredients, finding clever ways to purify water, and even helping the colonists make toys and simple educational tools for little Jonas. Elias observed her quietly, noting how her calm confidence seemed to inspire others. People who had been grumbling about the harshness of life began to work together more effectively. A sense of community, fragile though it was, began to form around her. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the settlement in shades of orange and red, Elias found himself walking toward the cooking hut. He saw Marla rocking the baby in her arms, humming softly in a tune that seemed to come from another time, another world. Jonas's eyes were half closed, his tiny hand curled around her finger. "You're doing well," Elias said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Marla looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled. "I'm just doing what I can," Elias nodded. "This place, it's hard, harder than anyone expects, but you remind me why humans survive, not just because we're strong or smart, but because we care. Because we see each other even when it's easier not to." Marla's smile softened. "I've always believed that, sir, even when people don't notice it." He watched her for a moment, thinking about the long days ahead. There would be storms, setbacks, challenges. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hope, quiet, steady, and resilient. Over the next week, the colony settled into a rhythm. Marla became an integral part of daily life. She organized meals, coordinated small tasks, and most importantly, brought a sense of calm and encouragement to the settlers. She helped teach the children to read using scraps of paper and old electronic tablets, always patient, always gentle. One morning, as the settlement prepared to harvest a batch of alien tubers, Elias noticed Marla at the edge of the field, examining the soil and plants carefully. He walked over. "You're learning fast," he said. "I have to," she replied. "This place, it's not forgiving. If we want to survive, we have to understand it, not just the storms or the soil, but the way everything works together." Elias nodded. "You see patterns others miss. That's very human of you." Marla tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Humans adapt. We don't just survive, we change our environment. We learn, we teach, we care. Other species, they might have strength or speed or instinct, but humans, our edge is how we think and how we care. You remind me of that." She blinked, surprised by the compliment, and a small warmth spread through her chest. Elias didn't offer praise lightly. The day passed with routine tasks, but that night, a small dust storm rolled in from the northern plains. The wind howled, rattling the buildings and tossing loose supplies into the red air. The settlers rushed to secure what they could. Marla, already experienced after a week, guided them calmly, securing the baby and helping to cover fragile equipment. Elias watched from the central hut, amazed at her composure. Where others panicked, she acted. Where others argued, she directed. And through it all, she did not demand recognition. She simply ensured that everyone was safe. When the storm finally passed, the settlement was largely intact. The settlers cheered quietly, not just for their survival, but for the sense of unity that Marla had helped foster. Elias approached her once more, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than I could have asked. I think you might be the reason this colony survives." Marla shook her head, smiling. "I'm just doing my part, sir. That's all any of us can do." And yet, in the quiet of the evening, as the twin suns rose again to signal another day, Elias felt a certainty he had not known before. This small, overlooked human, with courage, care, and ingenuity, represented the best of humanity. If she could thrive here, if the colony could thrive with people like her, then maybe, just maybe, humans had a chance on this unforgiving frontier. For now, that was enough. The morning sun rose slowly over Urindor IV, painting the red dust of the settlement in pale gold. Commander Elias Morn walked along the perimeter of the colony, checking the solar panels and water filters that kept their fragile outpost alive. The twin suns had brought another day of heat, but the air smelled fresher after the dust storm that had passed the previous night. Marla was already outside, carefully tending to the garden of alien vegetables that she had helped cultivate. She bent low to inspect a strange, bulbous plant, her hands gentle as she touched the delicate leaves. Even after only a week, she had learned the rhythms of the colony, the quirks of the alien soil, and the secrets hidden in Urindor's harsh landscape. Her presence had become a quiet reassurance for the settlers, proof that humans could adapt to anything. Elias stopped to watch her for a moment. It was easy to underestimate Marla at first glance. Her round face, her soft voice, her small stature, they did not speak of strength or endurance. But she had a mind that saw possibilities where others saw problems, and a patience that could calm fear when hope seemed impossible. "Morning, sir," she said, looking up and wiping her hands on her apron. "I was checking the soil near the northern field. I think the tubers will grow better if we adjust the watering system." Elias nodded. "Show me." She led him to the northern irrigation line, where water leaked slowly from a cracked pipe. Most settlers would have patched it in a simple, temporary way, but Marla had already figured out a more permanent solution. Using salvaged tubing and small sensors from old equipment, she had rigged a system that would adjust water flow automatically depending on soil moisture. "Clever," Elias said, genuinely impressed. "Most humans wouldn't think of combining old tech with new soil like this, but it might just work." Marla shrugged, a small smile on her face. "We have to. This planet doesn't forgive mistakes, and humans are good at solving problems." Elia's chest swelled slightly with pride. He had spent his life commanding humans in extreme situations, and he had seen firsthand the stubbornness and creativity that made them survive. But seeing it in Marla, in someone so overlooked by others, reminded him why humanity could thrive where others might fail. By midday, the settlement was buzzing with activity. The colonists moved in practice patterns, collecting water, tending to crops, and repairing structures damaged in the last storm. Marla moved among them, quietly offering guidance. She didn't command, she suggested. She didn't criticize, she showed solutions. And slowly, the colonists began to trust her judgment, following her advice even when it went against their instincts. It wasn't long before a new challenge appeared. A small group of settlers reported strange tracks near the water storage tanks. Elias and Marla followed the tracks to a small grove of alien shrubs. There, they discovered tiny, rodent-like creatures with iridescent shells, nibbling at the water tanks and gnawing at pipes. The creatures were not dangerous in the traditional sense, but if left unchecked, they could destroy the colony's water supply. "Great," muttered Elias. "Just when we start to recover, nature reminds us we don't belong here." Marla observed the creatures quietly. She didn't panic, didn't reach for weapons. Instead, she crouched near the tracks and watched. "They're clever," she said after a moment. "They're not attacking us. They're looking for food and water. If we understand their patterns, we can redirect them without harming them and without risking the colony." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Redirect them? How?" Marla smiled faintly. "Follow me." She led him to the garden, where she had prepared a small supply of tubers and water in containers. Using simple signals and scent markers, she created a trail leading away from the settlement. The creatures, curious and opportunistic, followed the trail, leaving the water tanks untouched. By the end of the day, the threat was gone, and the colonists looked on in amazement. Elias shook his head. "Most humans would have tried to trap or poison them. But you solved the problem without violence, efficient and safe. That's very human." Marla shrugged again. "Sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about thinking, understanding, and finding a way to coexist." That evening, the settlement gathered around the central fire pit. The day had been long but productive. Marla served a simple meal of alien tubers and water-rich fruits, and for the first time, the settlers felt something they had not experienced in weeks: hope. Elias sat beside her quietly. "You know," he said, "this colony was barely holding on when you arrived. Now it feels alive. People are working together, looking for solutions, trusting each other. You've made a difference." Marla looked down at her hands. "I'm just doing my part. Humans always find a way, sir. We may be small or slow or fat," she added lightly, smiling at herself, "but we survive because we think and care." Elias laughed softly. "Fat doesn't matter, courage does. And thinking, that's something no alien here has matched yet." The settlers around the fire glanced at them, curious about the quiet conversation. They were beginning to understand what Elias meant. Humans survived not because they were the strongest, but because they could see, think, and care in ways that mattered most. The next morning brought another challenge. The colony's old solar array was failing. The panels tilted incorrectly, reducing energy output by half. Without power, the water filters would stop, communications would falter, and the settlement would lose its fragile balance. Elias and Marla climbed to the array together. The panels were heavy and unwieldy, and the wind made work difficult. Marla examined the structure carefully, her mind calculating, her fingers moving quickly. "I can rig a temporary support using these beams," she said. "And with the old control system, we can automate the tilt to track the suns more efficiently. It won't be perfect, but it will hold until we can get replacement parts." Elias nodded, impressed once again. "Go ahead." The next few hours were tense. Elias and Marla worked together, lifting panels, tightening bolts, and wiring circuits. The wind buffeted them, sand whipping across their faces, but they didn't stop. Finally, after long hours under the twin suns, the array was fixed. When the power surged back to the colony, lights flickering to life, settlers cheering at the restored systems, Elias felt a swell of pride. "This is what humans do," he said aloud, mostly to himself. "We adapt, we think, we survive." Marla looked at him, wiping sweat from her forehead. "And we do it together." Over the next few weeks, life on Urindor IV settled into a fragile routine. The colony grew stronger, more organized. Marla taught the children about plants, water systems, and problem solving. She guided settlers in creating better shelters from the dust storms. She even introduced small leisure activities, like storytelling nights, where the adults and children shared tales from Earth and invented new stories about the alien world around them. Elias watched it all, realizing that this small, overlooked woman had ignited something far greater than meals or repairs. She had awakened a spark of ingenuity, cooperation, and resilience in everyone around her. One evening, after the settlers had gone to sleep, Elias and Marla stood outside the main hut, looking at the stars. The twin suns had set, leaving the alien sky a deep indigo. Tiny points of light glimmered, distant worlds and galaxies far beyond their reach. "You ever think about how humans ended up here?" Elias asked quietly. Marla nodded. "All the time, and I think we're here because we survive. Not because we're strongest or fastest or smartest, but because we adapt, we think, and we care, and because we don't give up." Elias smiled faintly. "You're right, and you've reminded me why humanity has a chance on this planet, and maybe any planet we choose to call home." Marla returned the smile, then looked down at the baby in her arms, who slept peacefully despite the wind rattling the walls of their shelter. "It's not just survival for us," she said softly. "It's survival for the next generation. And if we teach them well, they'll carry it further than we ever could." Elias nodded. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply watching the stars, letting the quiet settle over them. Somewhere deep inside, he felt hope rekindle. Humans, despite everything, had a unique edge, one born of ingenuity, care, and the will to survive. And here on Urindor IV, that edge was beginning to show. The alien world was harsh. The storms would come again. The challenges would never end. But for the first time, the settlement had the tools and the human spirit to face them with confidence. And as long as humans like Marla were among them, Elias knew one thing for certain. No world, no matter how harsh, could break them. The dust had settled over Urindor IV after the small storms and minor crises of the past weeks. Life in the colony had gained a fragile rhythm, but it was not yet peaceful. The settlers still faced a harsh planet, unpredictable weather, and strange alien flora and fauna that tested their ingenuity daily. But one thing had changed. A sense of trust and unity was slowly growing among them, a quiet bond that made even the harshest days a little easier to bear. Marla had become more than just a cook or a caretaker for little Jonas. She was now the quiet heart of the colony, moving among the settlers, offering guidance and encouragement. She was always calm, always patient, and always observing. Even Elias had to admit that she saw things others missed. She noticed small details, weak beams in the shelters, uneven irrigation, the way the children tired quickly in the midday heat, that, if addressed, would improve life for everyone. On this particular morning, Marla was kneeling near the edge of the settlement, carefully examining a cluster of alien plants. Jonas, now a little older and more alert, sat in a small basket beside her, poking curiously at the leaves. "You're very patient with him," Elias said, approaching. Marla looked up and smiled. "He's curious like all humans. Curiosity is good. It teaches them how to adapt." Elias nodded, thinking about the settlers in general. Humans were fragile compared to the wildlife and weather of this world. Yet their adaptability, creativity, and care made them formidable in ways alien species rarely matched. "You know," he said, "I underestimated you at first. I thought, well, I don't know what I thought. But you've shown me something important. Being strong isn't everything. Seeing, understanding, helping, that matters more." Marla tilted her head. "That's humanity, sir. We survive not just with strength but with care and intelligence. That's what I've always believed." Elias paused, considering her words. "And you're teaching the colony that without even trying." By mid-morning, a group of settlers had gathered near the communal work area, struggling to assemble a shelter for a new storage unit. They were arguing quietly about which beam should go where. Marla approached, carrying a small set of tools she had repaired from salvaged parts. "Here," she said softly, setting down the tools. "We can do this more easily if we work together and follow a simple plan." "Let me show you." The settlers glanced at each other, then shrugged and allowed her to lead. Marla directed them step by step, showing how to balance the beams, tie supports, and secure the walls efficiently. It wasn't just the instructions that mattered. It was the calm way she guided them, the patience she offered when they made mistakes, and the quiet encouragement that kept them focused. By the afternoon, the new storage unit was complete, sturdy, and ready to protect the colony's supplies. The settlers stepped back, breathing heavily but smiling. "I didn't think we could do it," said one of them. Marla smiled warmly. "You can. You just need to see the problem clearly and work together." Elias watched quietly from the side, feeling pride swell in his chest. He had spent years in leadership, commanding people under far harsher conditions. Yet Marla's approach reminded him of a deeper truth. Humans thrive not because of rules or orders, but because of cooperation, trust, and the ability to adapt. Later that afternoon, a small problem arose that could have easily turned into a disaster. The settlement's water reservoir had developed a leak. It was a minor crack, but enough to waste precious water in the hot sun. Panic began to ripple among the settlers as they realized the implications. Marla stepped forward immediately. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "We can fix this, but we need to work carefully together." She directed the colonists to drain the reservoir slightly, keeping just enough water for immediate needs. Then she showed them how to patch the crack using a combination of old repair kits and resin extracted from native plants. It was tricky work, requiring patience and steady hands, but under Marla's guidance, the colonists learned quickly. Within a few hours, the reservoir was fixed. Not perfectly, but well enough to sustain the colony until they could reinforce it further. Elias couldn't hide his admiration. "You're teaching them how to think," he said quietly to Marla. She shrugged. "They're learning themselves. Humans are good at that. They just need guidance sometimes." As the weeks passed, Marla's influence spread beyond practical repairs and cooking. She began organizing small lessons for the children, teaching them about plants, basic engineering, and problem-solving. She encouraged creativity, letting them invent new ways to use the alien materials around them. Little Jonas followed her closely, absorbing everything like a sponge, asking endless questions and exploring the world with wide-eyed curiosity. Elias noticed a change in the colony as a whole. Settlers who had once bickered over small disagreements now collaborated willingly. They shared tools, exchanged tips on plant care, and even organized small competitions to see who could repair a structure fastest or grow the largest tuber. The atmosphere was lighter, more hopeful. One evening, Elias joined Marla and the children around the fire pit. She was telling a story about humans traveling across the stars, inventing clever tools to survive on new worlds. The children listened with rapt attention, eyes wide, imagining themselves as brave explorers. Even the older settlers lingered, drawn by her storytelling. "You make humans seem heroic," one of the older settlers whispered to Elias. Elias smiled. "They are. Sometimes it just takes someone to remind us." Marla glanced at him, catching the comment. "Humans are more than we see on the surface," she said softly. "We survive because we care, because we think, because we try. That's what makes us strong, not muscle or height or speed." Elias nodded, feeling a quiet sense of awe. Here on a distant planet, humanity's true strength was shining through, in patience, in ingenuity, in kindness. The real test came unexpectedly. One morning, while Elias and a group of settlers were repairing a section of the outer fence, a sudden heat wave swept across the settlement. The twin suns burned hotter than usual, and the thin shelters offered little relief. Even with careful planning, water reserves were stretched thin, and the settlers began to grow weary. Marla immediately sprang into action. She coordinated shade structures using fabric from old tents and repaired panels, rationed water carefully, and guided the colonists in creating a rotation system to prevent anyone from overheating. She even organized activities to keep the children occupied and safe, teaching them to build simple shelters and water collectors. Elias watched in amazement as the settlement functioned like a single organism, each part moving in sync with the others. He realized then that Marla's influence had created more than just practical survival skills. She had built bonds, trust, cooperation, and confidence that allowed humans to thrive even under extreme stress. When the heat wave finally subsided, the settlers gathered together, exhausted but unharmed. Elias approached Marla quietly. "You've done it again," he said. "Not just fixed problems, but made the colony stronger, smarter, more united." "How do you do it?" Marla smiled faintly. "I just remind them of what humans can do when we care, when we think, and when we work together. That's all any of us can do." Elias nodded, feeling gratitude and admiration. "I underestimated you once. I won't make that mistake again. You're remarkable," she laughed softly. "I'm just human, sir, like the rest of us. But sometimes humans need someone to show them what they're capable of." As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the settlement, Elias took a moment to reflect. The challenges of Urindor IV were far from over. The planet was harsh, unpredictable, and often unforgiving. Storms would return, water shortages would recur, and new problems would always arise. But he felt hope. Humans, he realized, had something no alien species he had encountered possessed: ingenuity, adaptability, and empathy. And with people like Marla leading quietly from within, the colony had a chance to survive and even thrive. Marla sat nearby, holding Jonas, who had grown more confident in his movements and curiosity about the world around him. She hummed a soft tune, a melody from Earth that had traveled across the stars. It was a small comfort, but it symbolized something larger: humans carrying their traditions, their values, and their strengths into an alien world, proving that even in hardship, they could build life, community, and hope. Elias watched her, feeling a quiet pride that went deeper than words. Here was a woman who had arrived quietly, underestimated by most, Yet she had transformed the settlement not through force or orders, but through guidance, care, and the quiet strength of human spirit. And in that moment, under the alien sky, Elias understood something profound. Humanity was extraordinary, not because of weapons or technology, but because humans saw, learned, adapted, and cared. And as long as they remembered that, no world, no matter how harsh, could break them. For the first time, he felt certain that Urindor IV was not just a struggle for survival. It was the beginning of a story about human ingenuity, human cooperation, and the quiet power of people who, despite appearances or doubts, could achieve greatness together. And at the heart of it, Marla, the overlooked cook who had arrived with little more than courage and determination, had shown everyone exactly what it meant to be human. The wind on Urindor IV was different today. It carried a sharp dryness, scraping against the thin walls of the settlement and rustling the alien grasses beyond the perimeter. The twin suns had barely risen, yet the heat already pressed heavily on the settlers' shoulders. Elias Morn walked along the outer edge of the colony, noting the shadows of the distant cliffs, where jagged rock formations caught the sunlight like molten metal. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that life on this planet was fragile, balanced between survival and disaster. Marla was outside as well, kneeling near a new garden bed. Little Jonas crawled nearby, exploring the alien soil with curiosity that never seemed to tire. Marla's hands worked quickly, adjusting irrigation lines and checking the health of the tubers, her movements calm and deliberate. Despite the heat, she seemed at ease, as though she and the planet had reached a silent understanding. "Morning," Elias said, approaching. He shaded his eyes against the sun's glare. "How's everything today?" Marla glanced up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The garden is good. The water levels are stable, but the northern cliffs, I think a rockslide might be possible if the wind keeps shifting like this." Elias followed her gaze to the jagged cliffs beyond the settlement. "You're thinking ahead," he said. "We'll need to reinforce the shelters and storage units near that area," Marla nodded. "We can use the same technique we used on the reservoir: supports, anchoring, and careful placement of the heaviest supplies. It will hold if we do it right." Elias smiled faintly. "You really think of everything," she shrugged. "Humans survive by thinking. That's the edge we have. We notice what others might miss." By midday, the winds had strengthened. Small rocks and dust whipped through the settlement, rattling the shelters and forcing the children inside. The settlers worked with Marla's guidance, reinforcing the northern structures and relocating fragile supplies. Every action was deliberate. Every step was calculated to prevent catastrophe. Yet despite their best efforts, a low rumble echoed from the cliffs. Elias and Marla exchanged a glance. The rumble was deep, rolling, ominous. They rushed to the northern edge, where small rocks had already begun tumbling toward the settlement. "Stay calm," Marla instructed. "We've reinforced the main shelters and the supplies are moved. We can handle this if everyone works together." Elias shouted instructions to the settlers, guiding them as they secured additional barriers and created safe zones. The rocks fell faster now, rattling the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air. Children huddled under Marla's care, and adults followed her calm guidance, moving with precision and trust. It was a tense hour, but the settlement held. Rocks clattered against reinforced walls, but the shelters remained intact. The settlers began to breathe again, realizing that human ingenuity had protected them once more. Elias placed a hand on Marla's shoulder. "You're incredible," he said. "You stay calm when everyone else panics, and you see solutions where no one else does. That's humanity's edge." Marla looked down at little Jonas, who had fallen asleep in a small cot she had placed in the safe zone. "It's not just me," she said softly. "Humans survive because we work together, because we see each other, and because we act before disaster arrives. That's what keeps us alive." The following days brought more challenges. The rockslide had revealed hidden weaknesses in the settlement's water system, and new alien plants had begun to encroach on the colony's fields. Food supplies were under threat, and the settlers' morale was beginning to waver. Marla immediately devised a plan. She organized the settlers into teams, each focusing on a different task: repairing irrigation, clearing alien growth, and reinforcing shelters. She demonstrated methods to extract more water from the soil and showed them how to rotate crops to keep the plants healthy. One evening, Elias joined her at the edge of the fields. He watched as she explained a technique to a group of settlers, showing how to combine the planet's native soil with compost from the colony's kitchen waste. The settlers worked diligently, following her instructions, adjusting their methods as she guided them. "You know," Elias said, "I've seen humans survive on Earth and other colonies, but what you're doing here, it's something else. You're not just surviving, you're teaching others to thrive. That's rare." Marla smiled faintly. "Humans are clever, we adapt. And when we work together, we're unstoppable. The planet is harsh, yes, but it's not unbeatable." Elias shook his head in admiration. "And you make it look so simple." She laughed softly. "It's only simple when you remember what humans are capable of." The real test came unexpectedly. One morning, an unusual heat wave swept across the settlement. The twin suns burned brighter than usual, and the thin shelters barely held against the oppressive heat. Water levels dropped faster than expected, and the colonists grew tired quickly. Panic began to ripple through the settlement. Children cried from the heat, adults argued over rationing, and even the strongest settlers looked exhausted. Elias felt the familiar tightening of concern in his chest. A crisis was unfolding. Marla moved quickly. She coordinated shade areas using fabric from old tents, designed a rotation schedule so everyone could rest and avoid the sun, and rationed water carefully, making sure the children and the most vulnerable were attended to first. She even organized activities to keep the children engaged, teaching them simple methods to collect condensation from surfaces and shade the youngest ones. Her calm presence steadied the settlers. Arguments stopped. Confusion disappeared. The settlement began functioning like a single organism, each member following Marla's guidance with trust and confidence. By evening, the heat wave had passed, and the settlers were exhausted but safe. Elias approached Marla quietly. "You did it again," he said. "Not just kept them alive, but made them stronger, more organized, and more confident." "How do you do it?" Marla smiled faintly. "I just remind them what humans are capable of. We see, we think, we adapt, and we care. That's all we need to survive." Elias nodded, realizing she was right. Humans had an edge that no alien species had yet matched: ingenuity, cooperation, and empathy combined. The heat wave had revealed something else. The settlers had begun to rely on each other more than ever. Even those who had doubted Marla's abilities now followed her guidance willingly. They understood the value of human cooperation, ingenuity, and care. Elias noticed a change in the children as well. They were curious, observant, and inventive. Little Jonas had learned how to help gather water, assist with simple repairs, and even identify plants that could be used for food or medicine. He was learning not from strict instructions, but from watching humans survive together, adapting to challenges as they came. One night, as the twin suns set and the sky turned deep blue, Elias found himself walking beside Marla. She held little Jonas, who had fallen asleep in her arms, and hummed softly, a melody from Earth. "You ever think about what makes humans special?" Elias asked. Marla nodded. "All the time. We survive because we see and care. We adapt, we solve problems, and we protect each other. That's what makes us strong, not muscle, not speed, but our mind and our heart." Elias smiled. "You've reminded the settlers of that, and you've reminded me too." Marla glanced at him, her eyes reflecting the alien stars above. "It's why we're here, sir. To survive, yes, but also to teach the next generation that humans can thrive no matter the world, and if we work together, nothing can stop us. Elias felt a deep sense of hope. The colony had survived storms, rockslides, alien intrusions, and heat waves. And through it all, humans had proven that their true strength lay in cooperation, ingenuity, and empathy. He realized that this was more than survival. It was a lesson in humanity's edge, the ability to see, to think, and to care in ways that allowed them not just to endure but to grow and thrive. Marla, small and underestimated, had become the symbol of that edge. Through her actions, she had shown that humanity's greatest strengths were often invisible at first glance: patience, creativity, and the courage to guide others quietly. Elias looked at the settlement, the structures reinforced, the settlers resting, the children asleep in safe shelters. Humans had faced the worst that Urindor IV could throw at them, and yet here they were. Not broken, not defeated, but stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Marla hummed softly, little Jonah's asleep in her arms, as if the melody itself was a promise of what humans could achieve. Elias whispered quietly to himself, "No world is too harsh for humanity. Not when we see, think, and care." And with that thought, he knew the settlement was no longer just surviving. It was beginning to thrive. The twin suns rose slowly over Urindor IV, spilling light across the settlement and casting long shadows over the red dust and alien grasses. The colony had changed. What had once been a fragile cluster of shacks and shelters was now a carefully organized community. The settlers moved with purpose, tending gardens, repairing structures, and teaching the children about the world around them. There was a quiet energy in the air, one that spoke of confidence, hope, and shared purpose. Commander Elias Morn walked through the settlement, watching. He had seen this colony at its weakest, when dust storms tore at their shelters and resources were so scarce that the smallest mistake could have been fatal. And now, it thrived, not because of luck or strength alone, but because humans had adapted, learned, and worked together. Marla was at the edge of the garden, kneeling beside little Jonas, who was now old enough to help her water the plants. She guided his small hands carefully, showing him how to handle the fragile alien tubers without damaging them. Her gentle voice carried across the garden as she spoke to him, explaining why humans survived through thought, care, and cooperation. "You see, Jonas," she said, smiling, "humans are strong in ways that aren't always visible. We can see, we can think, and we can help each other. That's why we survive, not because we're the fastest or the strongest, but because we learn, adapt, and care." Jonas nodded seriously, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "I want to help humans survive too, Marla," he said. She laughed softly. "You already are, little one. Just by learning, you carry the future of our people." The morning's tasks began quickly. The settlers organized themselves into teams, each focused on different aspects of the colony. Some repaired the shelters damaged by earlier storms, others tended the gardens, and a few worked on the water collection system. Everything ran smoothly. The settlers had learned not just to survive, but to anticipate, plan, and adapt. Elias walked among them, occasionally offering advice but mostly observing. He noticed the subtle changes in the community. Children were curious and inventive, helping with simple repairs and experimenting with small inventions. Adults collaborated without arguing, each respecting the other's strengths and experience. There was laughter, even in hard work, something that had been rare before Marla's arrival. It was remarkable, he thought, how one person's guidance could change the rhythm of life so completely. Marla's quiet leadership had nurtured not just skills but bonds. Trust had replaced fear. Cooperation had replaced suspicion. And in that environment, humans thrived. By midday, a challenge arose that tested everything the colony had learned. A sudden and unusual storm approached from the western plains. It was not the typical dust storm. The wind was faster, carrying strange seeds and debris, and the temperature had risen sharply. The settlers paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. This was different. This could be dangerous. Marla stepped forward, calm as ever. "We've handled storms before," she said. "This one is stronger, yes, but we know what to do. We've prepared, we've planned, and we've learned. Follow the instructions and we'll keep everyone safe." Elias nodded. "Everyone, listen to Marla. She knows exactly what to do." The settlers sprang into action. Marla directed them to secure loose materials, reinforce shelters, and move fragile supplies into safe zones. Children were brought inside, and little Jonas helped her carry small containers of water to the central hut. Even the older settlers moved efficiently, trusting her guidance and the system she had taught them. The storm hit. Wind howled across the settlement, tearing at the structures, whipping dust and debris through the air. But unlike before, the colony was ready. The shelters held. The supplies remained safe. No one panicked. Everyone worked together, following the plan carefully. Marla moved through the settlement, checking on each group, ensuring no one was left behind. Elias followed, offering help where he could, but mostly observing. He felt a deep sense of pride and awe. Humans were not just surviving anymore, they were thriving, even under extreme conditions. Hours later, the storm passed. The twin suns returned, casting light on a settlement that had weathered the worst of nature's fury. There was dust and debris, but no injuries, no panic, only the quiet satisfaction of a community that had faced a challenge and met it with ingenuity, cooperation, and care. Elias approached Marla. She was wiping sweat from her brow, little Jonas asleep in her arms once again. "You did it," he said. "Not just survived, but led. The colony held together because of you." Marla shook her head gently. "We did it together. Every human here played a part. Humans survive because we think, we care, and we act together. That's why we made it through." Elias looked around the settlement. The settlers were beginning to repair minor damages, smiling as they worked. Children were exploring again, running through the cleared paths and examining plants, learning as they went. He realized then that the colony had changed completely. It was no longer fragile, it was resilient, it was alive. Over the next few days, the settlement repaired and improved. Marla taught new techniques to the settlers, better ways to collect water, new methods to protect crops from alien pests, and creative solutions to improve their shelters. Every lesson reinforced the bond between the settlers. They were no longer isolated individuals struggling for survival. They were a single, cohesive community. Elias watched quietly as the settlers built a new structure together, laughing and sharing ideas. The air was light with cooperation and the joy of accomplishment. The colony's children, including little Jonas, played nearby, helping where they could and learning from everyone around them. He thought about how far they had come. Just a few weeks ago, they had been fragile, fearful, unsure of whether life on Urindor IV was even possible. Now they thrived in ways that none of them could have imagined. And the credit, he realized, went not to one person alone, but to the human spirit itself, to ingenuity, cooperation, and empathy embodied in every action. Marla, small and underestimated when she arrived, had become the symbol of that spirit. Her courage, patience, and intelligence had transformed the settlement. She had shown that even someone overlooked or underestimated could lead, inspire, and teach others to be extraordinary. That evening, Elias and Marla stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the alien horizon. The twin suns were setting, casting golden light across the red plains and distant cliffs. There was a quiet peace in the air, a sense of accomplishment that warmed even the harshest landscape. "Look at them," Elias said softly. "The children, the settlers, everyone. They've learned to survive, to thrive. And it's because humans have an edge no one else has." Marla smiled, holding little Jonas carefully. "Yes, humans survive because we see, we think, we care. That edge doesn't come from strength alone. It comes from knowing each other, working together, and never giving up. Elias nodded. And we'll carry it forward. This colony, this settlement, it's just the beginning. Marla glanced at the children playing nearby. They'll carry it further than we ever could. Every human who learns, adapts, and cares continues the story. And on a world like this, every story matters. Elias felt a deep sense of hope. He realized that humanity's true power was not in technology, weapons, or numbers, but in ingenuity, cooperation, and empathy. And with people like Marla, patient, intelligent, courageous, humans could survive anywhere, even on a planet as harsh as Urindor IV. Over the following weeks, the colony continued to thrive. The settlers planted new gardens, reinforced shelters, and explored the surrounding plains with curiosity and care. Every challenge was met with ingenuity and cooperation. Children learned not just survival skills, but problem-solving, creativity, and the importance of helping each other. Marla taught them to observe the world, to think critically, and to act with patience and care. Little Jonas grew confident, following her guidance and learning the ways of humans on this alien world. He understood, even at a young age, that survival was about more than strength. It was about adaptability, empathy, and teamwork. Elias watched quietly, proud of what humans had achieved. The settlement had transformed from a fragile outpost into a thriving, organized, and resilient community. And it had happened not through fear or force, but through the quiet, patient power of humans working together. As the twin suns rose once more, casting light across the red plains, Elias stood beside Marla at the edge of the settlement. They watched the settlers moving through their tasks, the children exploring, the community alive with energy and purpose. "You've done more than I could have imagined," Elias said. "This colony, it's alive because of humans, because of you." Marla shook her head. "It's alive because of all of us. Humans survive because we see, we think, we help, and we care. And now this settlement has learned it too." Elias smiled. "Then we have a chance, a real chance, on Urindor IV and wherever humans go next." Marla looked at the rising suns, a quiet determination in her eyes. "Yes, and we'll carry it forward. We'll teach the next generation to survive, to thrive, and to never underestimate what humans can do." Elias nodded, feeling a deep sense of certainty. The colony had survived storms, rockslides, alien pests, and heat waves. It had grown stronger, wiser, and more united. And above all, it had proven something profound. Humanity's edge was real, and it was extraordinary. As little Jonas reached for her hand, she smiled and took it. The child's curiosity and wonder reflected the promise of the future. The settlement would continue to grow, humans would continue to thrive, and the story of their ingenuity, cooperation, and care would endure, on Urindor IV and beyond. And as the twin suns climbed higher, Elias knew that the colony's future was bright. The human spirit, resilient and clever, had triumphed once again.